Hello, welcome to the virtual Healthy Brain Fair. Alzheimer's Family Center is very proud to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Teryn Clark. Dr. Clark is a board-certified neurologist with a primary focus on memory and cognitive health. She has been in private practice in Orange County since 2003. She graduated from UCLA with a major in biology and a minor in business administration. She earned her medical degree from USC Keck School of Medicine and was designated a Dean Scholar. She completed her residency training in neurology at Harbor UCLA Medical Center. Dr. Clark has served as the medical director and board member of Alzheimer's Family Center in Huntington Beach. The Alzheimer's Foundation of America honored her as the Dementia Care Professional of the Year for 2015. The same year, she was selected to be a delegate to the American Academy of Neurology Palatucci Leadership Forum. She also serves the medical community as an expert reviewer for Medical Board of California. Please help me welcome Dr. Teryn Clark.
Hi, my name is Teryn Clark. I'm a neurologist in Newport Beach, California. The focus of my clinic is on keeping our brains healthy and treating people with cognitive disorders such as Alzheimer's disease. I wanted to thank you for making the time today to learn about how to keep your brain healthy. My favorite topic to talk about with people who are motivated, like you are, is how they can optimize their lifestyle to keep their brain and memory as healthy as possible. So when we talk about lifestyle choices for optimal brain health, they fall into 5 main categories: exercise, socializing, diet, sleep, and toxins. So we're going to talk about all 5 of those areas today, and I'll give you some action items of how you can make some simple tweaks in those areas to help keep your brain healthy. So the first topic is exercise. Every study that's looked at brain health and memory has shown that exercise is the #1 thing we can do to keep our brain healthy. When we talk about exercise, we want to do 2 different kinds of exercise. We want to do both cardiovascular, which is getting your heart rate up, increasing oxygen in your bloodstream and to your brain, and also anaerobic exercise or muscle resistance exercise. The optimal amount of exercise for brain health seems to be about 45 minutes per day. Beyond 45 minutes, it doesn't seem that we get any more health benefit to our brains, although we might get more health benefit to the strength of our muscles and our balance. What I recommend to most of the people I talk to about exercise is start out with 20 minutes 5 days a week. I recommend alternating between cardiovascular exercise and muscle resistance exercise. Many people choose to spend 3 days a week doing cardiovascular exercise, which could be walking or using a stationary bike or a recumbent bicycle or bicycling out in the community. Those other 2 days, we should be focusing on muscle resistance exercise. Now, that doesn't have to be lifting weights. It can be any time you're resisting even your own weight or muscle strength. So that could be doing modified push-ups on a desk or a table. It could be doing squats. It also could be participating in yoga or Pilates. So most people I talk to do 3 days a week of cardiovascular exercise, mostly walking or bike riding, for 45 minutes. And then the other 2 days, they spend 45 minutes doing Pilates, yoga, lightweight weights, or some muscle resistance exercises like push-ups and squats. There are others who choose to do 5 days a week, 45 minutes of exercise, where they combine both of those. And that's fine too. Maybe going out for a half an hour walk and then spending 15 minutes doing squats, modified push-ups, or some other sort of muscle resistance exercise. If you're not sure if you're getting enough exercise from your walk, if you're raising your heart rate enough, I find that a good gauge or rule of thumb is that when you do your walk and you come home and open the door, your house should feel stuffy. That tells you your heart rate is up and you've gotten a little warmer. A lot of people, and myself included, like to walk their dogs as a form of exercise. However, I have a Labrador, a male Labrador, who likes to smell every tree in our entire neighborhood. So I don't get a chance to get my heart rate up when I walk him. So the way I do that, and I recommend a lot of my patients get their daily walking exercise, is I walk my dog, we stop at every tree, then I drop my dog off at home, and I do that walk 2 more times at a pretty brisk pace to get my heart rate up a little bit. So you might consider doing that too if you have a dog who is quite a tree sniffer. The next topic I wanted to talk about is diet. But before we do that, I wanted to step back a little bit and explain what happens to our brain as we age. We build up some toxins over a lifetime in our brain. One of them is called amyloid, and the other is called tau. If we live long enough, most of us will build up those proteins to some extent. If we build them up too fast and to a very large extent, they are associated with Alzheimer's disease. So we want to look at those proteins and find any way we can not build them up any faster than we already will, just due to our living a long time. Diet is very important, having the right diet, in decreasing how quickly we build up amyloid. And the main reason for that is sugar. So what I recommend to my patients is cutting down sugar. And I'll tell you why. When you take in sugar that's either from a processed food or pretty much any food that has sugar other than fresh fruit, and I'll come around to why fresh fruit is in a separate category all unto itself. When we eat one of those processed sugary foods, we have a big spike of glucose or sugar that comes into our system. It's quickly followed by a large spike of insulin to push that sugar into the cells so that the cells can use it for fuel. After insulin has done its job, it's floating around in our bloodstream, and it has to be broken down before it can be excreted out of our system. It's broken down by an enzyme called insulin-degrading enzyme. This seems very well named, but when scientists discovered this enzyme and named it, they didn't know all of the functions that that enzyme performed. One of the other things that that enzyme breaks down is amyloid. So if we are constantly bombarding our systems with little spikes or big spikes of sugar throughout the day, we're generating a lot of spikes of insulin. And then our body is going to spend more time than it really should breaking down insulin. Insulin and amyloid, which already occurs in our bloodstream, compete to get broken down by that same enzyme. And so if we have a lot of insulin, we're not going to break down all the amyloid we should. And when we don't break down that amyloid, it gets deposited in our brain. So you can see how this would be dangerous for increasing our risk for developing Alzheimer's disease later in life. So it's imperative to cut down our sugar intake. What I recommend for a first step in decreasing our sugar intake is following the American Heart Association guidelines for sugar intake, which are 24 grams a day for women and 36 grams a day for men. I think this is a great target goal, and it's quite difficult. We have to consider that most Americans are consuming 80 grams of sugar per day. So we probably have a way to go to decreasing to get under either 24 grams for women or 36 grams for men. We try our best to get there. There are multiple days we won't be within that range, but we try our best to decrease. So what I would encourage you to do is read labels. There is really no way to cut down your sugar without reading labels, because so many things we find in the grocery store are not what they seem on their face. When I talk to people in person, which is usually how I talk about brain health, I have some great slides that show different foods, and it's surprising the sugar that we find in some foods. For example, when I give this lecture, I can tell people are moaning and groaning, thinking that they're not going to get to have cookies anymore, and they're going to have to give up their ice cream. And so if we consider that, let's just think about my favorite, Haagen-Dazs vanilla. It has 17 grams in a half a cup or a serving. So if I'm not reading labels, I might think, well, I'm really craving that Haagen-Dazs vanilla, so maybe I'll substitute with a vanilla protein drink. Maybe that's a good substitute. Surprisingly, when we look at a lot of the protein drinks, I found one that I thought was quite tasty. When I looked at the label, it had 45 grams of sugar in that protein drink. And so if I switch my ice cream for protein drink, two things happen. First of all, I feel a little neglected because what I really wanted was the ice cream, and I feel like I've sacrificed. Second of all, I've made a trade that actually is not a healthy choice at all. So what I would encourage you to do is have the things you truly love. When you're going to have a sugary food, make it very enjoyable and be satisfied with that and move on. I don't want you to switch to something that might seem less sugary without reading the label. Another switch that people often make for ice cream is yogurt. But when we look at most of the flavored yogurts, even many of the Yoplait yogurts, they have 22, sometimes 24 grams of sugar in a yogurt. So you can see it's probably better to have the ice cream and be happy and count it in your 24 or 36 grams of sugar per day, and then make the rest of your day all about fresh fruits, vegetables, and proteins with a little bit of healthy fat mixed in for good measure. So you have to read labels. Another pitfall of sugar and labeling are granola bars. So there are some granola bars that the box looks very plain. They actually look like a piece of bark. They're not gooey. They're not filled with chocolate. And so they look from the picture like they would be a good low sugar choice for a granola bar. However, when I looked at these granola bars, I found that they contained more sugar than a Rice Krispies treat. So there's just no way to get around reading the labels. That's where the actual information is. And you want to look for the line, not the carbohydrate line, but the line that says sugars. The reason that fresh fruit doesn't count in this, one way to think about it is it doesn't have a sugar label, so therefore it doesn't count. That's an easy way to remember. The reasoning behind that is that nature has packaged fresh fruits just as they should be taken in by our bodies. They have a mixture of sugars, and they also usually have a lot of fiber. So when we eat a fresh fruit, that fiber is bound to the sugar, and so we don't get such a fast, high spike of sugar coming into our system. It's a little bit slower, and so we don't get the insulin spike that we would expect with processed sugars. However, the minute that fresh fruit is processed into anything else, a juice, a jam, a yogurt, now it has a sugar label and now it counts. So another easy way to cut out a lot of sugar in your day would be probably to avoid juices. Another way to remember that is if you think about a diabetic who has passed out, usually that's from low sugar. And so if we want to revive them quickly, we don't run and give them an orange to eat. We give them orange juice. We want the maximum amount of unbound sugar that their system's going to accept right away. So if you're a juice drinker, consider instead of having orange juice, have an orange. Have the whole fruit version of that juice. Because, for example, in orange juice, we're getting the sugar from 5, 6, or 7 oranges. But even if it's a high fiber, high pulp version of orange juice, we're only getting the fiber of 1 orange. So you can see how out of balance those are and likely to contribute to having a high spike of sugar in your system. Now, this won't take work for too long of a time because once you find some low sugar alternatives, for example, a granola bar, I have a granola bar that I know only has 5 grams of sugar. And so now when I go to the grocery store, that's the only one I buy. So I don't have to spend the time looking at the labels anymore. I just know my low sugar alternatives and I stick with those. So I hope you will too. It's a little bit of work at the beginning, but the work becomes less and it really pays off tremendously. The next area we want to talk about is sleep. Sleep is tremendously important to brain health. You know that in the short term, if you don't sleep well one night, the next morning you will not be thinking at your best, and possibly the next day. If you have a night of terrible sleep, it's a day you're probably not going to wake up and work on your taxes. You probably would put that off to a day when you're thinking more clearly after having a good night of sleep. Well, sleep can affect your long-term memory as well, and it also has to do with amyloid. When we are in those deep levels of sleep, there's a cleaning and detoxifying mechanism that occurs in our brain, and one of the toxins that's removed is some of the amyloid that's deposited during the day. So if we are not getting those deep levels of sleep, if, for example, we have untreated sleep apnea, we are not going to get those deep levels of sleep. We're not going to detoxify our brains as we should. And that's another way that amyloid can build up faster in our brains. So it's really important to be sure you're sleeping well on a consistent basis. Not just the length of time, but the depth of sleep is very important. The last topic I wanted to talk with you about today are toxins. When I talk about toxins to the brain, I'm mostly talking about medications. Although there are other more esoteric toxins like heavy metals, I don't see those commonly in my practice. As so many Americans are taking so many pills every day, that increases our risk of toxicity to the brain from some of these medications. Some of these happen by a direct route, and that would include mostly pain medications and medications for things like anxiety in the class of Valium that tend to decrease our ability to think well and clearly. They make us feel foggy, and that happens more as we get to higher doses of those medications. The other group that is really important to think about are medications that directly change the neurotransmitters in our brain. We have a neurotransmitter or a chemical in our brain called acetylcholine. It's a compound that nerves use to communicate with each other within the brain. It's one of the chemicals that goes down in our brain if we're suffering from Alzheimer's disease. It's the compound that many of the Alzheimer's disease medications are trying to boost up. So it's a very important chemical. Unfortunately, there are a lot of antihistamines that decrease that chemical. You may be familiar with some of these, Benadryl. And then we often find this same medicine in the PM over-the-counter medicines, like Tylenol PM, Motrin PM. They have either doxylamine or diphenhydramine. Diphenhydramine is Benadryl, and a lot of people use those to sleep. The challenge with this is several-fold. First of all, those medications directly decrease the chemical that our nerve cells in our brain use to communicate with each other. The second part of that is people may have been taking these for a long time, but our metabolism of these medications, the amount to which we break these down and how quickly we break these down within our body changes over a lifetime. So somebody who's taken Benadryl or Unisom actually has the same compounds in it as well for many years will have a different effect as they're getting past 65 and into their 70s and 80s certainly than they had from 45. And it's easy for that to sneak up on people. If they've been taking these for decades and didn't seem to have an effect on their memory, we've got to stop those medicines so we can be sure that it's a medication effect and not an underlying problem with the brain, like amyloid buildup from other things. So it's really important to look at these over-the-counter medications and look at how they can affect the brain and talk about that with your physician. Sometimes they don't know what medications you're taking that you're buying at the pharmacy over the counter. The last group of medications that can adversely affect the brain that I wanted to talk about are important because they're very common. This is the group of cholesterol medicines that end in the word statin. So these are medications that by brand name are Lipitor, Zocor, rosuvastatin would be the generic, simvastatin is another generic. And these medications have a really interesting effect on the brain. You may be aware that several years ago, it's probably almost a decade now, there was a lot of information on the news about cholesterol medicines being dangerous for the brain and leading to Alzheimer's disease. And when we look at cholesterol medications and brain health, it's a really interesting story. When we look at medications for something, usually most of the data is pointing in one direction. And so if we look at all of the studies available, usually 95% of the studies on a certain compound will show one effect. There may be 5% that differ, but they're usually studies that either weren't done well or have some reason that they didn't end up concurring with the rest of the science. But when we look at cholesterol medicines and brain health, it's not 95-5. It's way more in the middle. We see a lot of studies in the medical literature that show they're good for brain health. We see a lot of studies in the medical literature that show they're bad for brain health. And how do we reconcile that? We reconcile that by the fact that when we take cholesterol medicines, we know it reduces our risk of strokes. If we have a stroke that kills part of our brain, that will negatively affect memory in many cases. So that's where we get all the literature that shows that statins or that class of cholesterol medicine are very important for brain health and are beneficial. The negative studies come from a different pathway in which those medications decrease our CoQ10 levels. And in the brain, that means our brain cells have less ability to generate energy. So as a neurologist, I want to protect people from stroke as best as I can. And so the statin medications are very important. But we tend to block the negative effects of statins by having people take CoQ10, especially in the form of ubiquinol or ubiquinone. Those are two very active forms of CoQ10. So I would recommend that you speak with your physician about that if you're someone who is taking medicines for cholesterol. It's really important to get all of the benefits and minimize the potential negative effects of those medications. So I wanted to thank you for spending so much time listening to me. I hope this information is really valuable to you. I hope it motivates you to make changes in your life, to exercise more, to cut down on sugar by reading labels. Again, you can look to the American Heart Association guidelines for sugar, which you can find on their website, that will remind you that the recommendation is to try to stay below 24 grams a day for women and 36 grams a day for men. The other area we didn't talk about much is socializing. It's really important for the brain. We have some challenges with socializing right now because as I'm recording this, we're still on partial lockdown for COVID-19. So where I would usually recommend people to get together in person, take classes at your local senior center, we're having to get very creative about that. As COVID is actually an airborne disease, which means it can transmit between people, that doesn't mean that it's floating around in our atmosphere waiting to infect us. So it still is safe to go out and exercise with a bit of distance between us and our friends. It is safe to sit on our porch and watch people go by and greet them as they do. It's safe to sit outside at a distance and socialize. It's also quite safe to be on your computer and socialize with friends and loved ones in that way. So I would encourage you to get creative and stay engaged with your community, your family, and your friends as we get through this difficult time. It's very important for the brain of humans to stay social, not only for our mental health, but for our direct brain health. I hope this has either motivated you to make some new healthy habits or reinforced those healthy habits that you're already making. You can make a huge difference on how your brain moves through as you age, and we've got to keep ourselves healthy. Thank you for listening, and feel free to reach out to me at my email address or to find me on my website, which is clarkneurology.com. Clark has an E on the end, clarkneurology.com. I look forward to you having many healthy and happy years of optimal brain health. Thank you.